Following the fiery spat between President Donald Trump and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the United States has halted military aid for Ukraine, leaving the war-torn country in an extremely precarious situation. While Zelensky has called the Oval Office spat with Trump regrettable, saying he's ready to work for Ukraine's peace. Remember, the United States is the largest provider of military aid to Ukraine. Since this war began 3 years ago, the United States has given billions of dollars to the Ukrainian army. That now, of course, has come to a halt, as is the intelligence sharing. The question is, how will it affect Ukraine amid Russia's offensive and the global implications of it? Find out in our next report.
Have you said thank you once? This
a lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today,
have you said thank
even
you?
I said a lot of times to American people.
You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards. Then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. Let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
What began as an astonishing moment in history with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance sparring with Zelensky in the Oval Office led to America suspending all military aid to Ukraine and now appears to be pivoting towards diplomacy. In his address to a joint session of Congress, President Trump read what he called an important letter from Zelensky.
The letter reads, Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer. Nobody wants peace more than the Ukrainians, he said.
Trump's address to Congress followed Zelensky's social media post where he expressed regret over the spat and readiness to work under Trump's leadership for lasting peace. While this hints at a cooling of tensions, Zelensky stopped short of an apology, something that Trump's camp has demanded. European leaders rallied behind Zelensky, but NATO subtly urged him to find a way to mend ties with Trump. Meanwhile, Moscow celebrated the US aid pause, calling it a significant step towards peace. But what does this aid freeze truly mean for Ukraine's war efforts? By halting all US military assistance, including billions in weapons and supplies, the White House is pressuring Kyiv to sue for peace. This decision affects shipments initially approved under President Biden, including ammunition and vehicles. Since the war began, the US has pledged over $122.8 billion in military, humanitarian, and financial aid to Ukraine, out of which over $67 billion is in the form of military aid alone. The top 5 donors to Ukraine have roughly provided over $280 billion in assistance since the war began. The aid freeze mainly affects previously approved but undelivered assistance. With no new aid packages likely in the near future, Ukraine is left scrambling. US funds also help Ukraine pay its teachers, doctors, and government salaries, further complicating the crisis. At the same time, reports suggest that Trump's administration is exploring lifting sanctions on Russia. After the window to Washington froze, Zelensky received a warm welcome in London. European leaders have doubled down on their support following the US's aid halt. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer positioned Britain as a bridge between Europe and Washington, pledging unwavering support to Ukraine. Starmer even declared that the UK is ready to put boots on the ground and planes in the air if needed.
We will, of course, continue working closely with our partners in NATO. This is a moment for Europe, and we are ready to step up.
È una pace che non rimane. E questo non se lo può permettere l'Ucraina, non se lo può permettere l'Europa, non se lo possono permettere gli Stati Uniti.
The war in Ukraine is not only about Ukrainian independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. It is about European security, and it is about American leadership.
Without renewed US aid, Ukraine's military may face critical shortages within the next 6 months. Zelensky appears at a crossroad: either agree to a ceasefire on Trump's terms or risk mounting battlefield losses. His latest statement while emphasizing gratitude to the US, also outlines an initial peace roadmap, including a prisoner exchange and halting air and sea attacks only if Russia reciprocates. For now, Ukraine and its European allies are keeping the country's guns firing, but Trump's warning looms large. Come back when you're ready for peace.
We also spoke with Brando Benfei, who's an EU parliamentarian, on what's next for Ukraine, even the European Union and the future of NATO, as well as India's prospects of peacemaking as far as Ukraine is concerned, all in the backdrop of Donald Trump halting the aid to Ukraine. Listen in to this CNN News 18 exclusive. I leave you with this conversation. Thank you so much for watching World 360. Me quickly bring in Mr. Brando Benfei, who is an EU parliamentarian. Thank you, Mr. Benfei, for joining in. Pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Now,
Thank you.
President Trump has referred to India along with European Union and China during his rhetoric on trade and reciprocal tariffs that signifies intensifying trade tensions between US and the global counterparts. Speaking of which, how do you see this approach impacting the global trade? And will it mean America first also for ordinary Americans, which many economists believe will be equally impacted?
Well, first of all, I want to say that we are trying to maintain a dialogue to find solutions. I myself am the chair of the delegation for the relations with the United States Congress of the European Parliament. And so in this role, I will be in a few weeks in US to have a dialogue on these topics to reach possibly agreements and support the effort to find solutions. But we have been very clear that we demand respect from the US counterparts, and so we will respond to any tariff measures in the direction of working for agreements to avoid a trade war. We don't think it will help either US or EU economy to have an increase of tariffs across the board. So we will work to avoid that, but we are also ready to retaliate if there are actions being taken. And that's probably going to happen, at least in the first phase. One very important topic for us is not to bring the EU legislation into the negotiation. We will not be willing to rediscuss our laws as part of the trade negotiations. We do not accept that the EU laws on environment, on digital, on public procurement are considered to be non-tariff barriers, because we do not question the US laws, and so we do not want the EU laws to be questioned. While you know instead that, for example, on the social media regulation, we had a lot of exchanges with the US, and we have seen members of the administration intervening on this, saying that the EU has put censorship on the social media, and this is obviously something we do not share, and we do not want to go into that because we don't think that's what we should discuss.
All right, but here's what you should be also discussing, Mr. Benfei. How do you respond to US President's accusation that EU has spent more on purchasing Russian oil and energy than spend on Ukraine to fight the war?
Yeah, that's something that was said during the speech
today,
in the Congress. Yeah, exactly. But we have to say, unfortunately, it's absolutely false. And you cannot say that it's not true. Like it was not true when Macron was at the Oval Office with Mr. Trump, and Mr. Trump said that the EU was giving money that would be given back by Ukraine, while United States have given money that would not get back. These are simply not true statements. And also about Russian gas and oils, it's been a quite clear policy of the EU to stop that kind of energy provision exactly when the war started. And in fact, Now, the liquefied natural gas from the United States is an important source.
When
We
it comes
think
to
we
the
can
military
find
aid to
solutions.
Ukraine, I'm sure, Mr. Benfe, you would agree that it's also coming from a space where the US president is also taking advantage of the fact that now you're confronted with the reality where EU's own defense spendings now are almost compelled into being increased.
Yes, in fact, this is a very important discussion that we should not get wrong. We are discussing this in the European Parliament exactly in these hours.
Lastly, I want to ask you, Mr. Benfe, with Russia pivot, do you believe that Donald Trump is actually committed to strengthening the NATO alliance, a time-tested NATO ally that regarded any attack on NATO as an attack on the United States? And that's what Harry Truman said back in 1949.
Well, I want to be very clear. If we don't respect this principle, NATO is finished. And I think instead that NATO is an important military alliance for the security interests of both US and EU. And so I think it should be maintained as an alliance where there is reciprocal assistance under the Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. So this is something where clarity is absolutely fundamental, and I think we will demand clarity on that also as we approach further commitment on NATO defense spending as an EU bloc.